I went from a finance degree to working in data science and tech. I came away with 3 very important takeaways that I teach to all of my students who are trying to pivot into tech. And so get your notepads out to write these down. I graduated from the University of Virginia back in 2019, and I came out of it with a finance degree, fully intending to work in the finance space or consulting. At the time in my business school, finance and consulting were the 2 main routes that were considered successful for business school grads, and I fully believe that. So when I graduated, I landed a return offer after an internship working at one of the big 4 as a financial analyst. So best of both worlds, right? That was consulting and finance together. So I was like, hey, I've made it. 2 years into that experience, I realized I actually hated finance. The number one telltale sign that you don't belong at a company or an organization anymore is that you no longer have that desire to grow. And for me, I remember thinking, I'm studying for my CFA, I have a finance degree, I've done a bunch of finance internships, but I literally don't know what I'm doing, nor do I care about learning it. At the time, I had paid thousands of dollars to sit for the CFA exam. This was around COVID or immediately after COVID. So these exams were constantly being pushed back because we had to take them in person. And every time that the opportunity came to push it back by another 6 months, I was like, heck yeah, let's do it. But then I was like, wait, that's a sign that I don't even want to get this over with. I don't want to do it. And that deep unsatisfaction was what pushed me to explore other alternative routes to the only thing that I knew, which was finance. What I landed upon was tech. I had no idea what working in tech meant, but I knew from classmates working at places like, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, that they were making the big bucks. And I was like, why not that for me? Oh, because I didn't have a technical degree. So I was like, that is ruled out for me, right? But then I put my handy dandy growth mindset cap on and I was like, okay, no, this is not actually impossible. I just have to hunker down and work hard, which was kind of a foreign feeling to me because 2 years into a career path where I was very jaded, I was like, I don't want to do hard things. This will require me to study. This will require me to apply to jobs. Gross. But it got to a point where I hated finance so much that I was like, anything different is better. But I did land on tech because I had prior experience studying data analytics and data science courses in that undergraduate degree through an IT track that I took. So I was like, okay, I have some advantage there. And through process of elimination, I was like, okay, data analytics sounds pretty legit. It doesn't sound too hardcore technical, and I had some experience. So I was like, full steam ahead. And at the time, I had been applying to other finance roles and data analytics roles and strategy roles. But what I realized was that going in so many different directions was actually harming me because my applications, my resume was so watered down, and I just sounded really confused in interviews. And so that was one of the biggest lessons I learned during that pivot into a technical field or any pivot. You should really narrow down your job search so that you are ruthlessly focused on one type of role, and that will tailor your strategy to a very specific niche and just make it so much easier. You will come across way clearer and like you actually know your shit in interviews and in your application. So that's kind of tip number 0. I have 3 legit tips coming up next. But what I realized that early on, and once I started focusing my job search on purely data analytics roles, even though, I didn't have the working experience there, the interview requests or recruiters reaching out to me and responding to my application started rolling in. And so I had interviewed for maybe between 5 to 10 data analyst roles. Much to my surprise, I was actually getting interviews. And then out of those 5 to 10, I landed 3 job offers, and 2 of those I turned down to ultimately work at another consulting firm in the DC area. That consulting firm saw my experience at one of the big 4 consulting firms as an advantage. So I really leaned on that because I did not have the strength of having the technical chops of being a data analyst in a prior role. So I really had to lean on the strengths that I did have, which was my consulting skills, and be like, hey, these soft skills are much harder to teach me. The technical skills, I can take courses, I can learn on the job, right? And that's how I reassured the employer that ultimately hired me and took me on as a data analyst. In my first role in tech as a data analyst, I learned so much on the job, and I consider myself super, super lucky that I did land that job because that team really did invest in its employees. They provided us with so many free online courses that we could take. They staffed me on projects where they knew that I would be able to pick up skills that I indicated I wanted to learn as a data analyst. And we had like dedicated learning days, mentorships in terms of superiors and also peer mentorships. So that role was really where I learned everything that I know today as a data analyst and a data scientist. If it weren't for that role, I wouldn't have been able to break into tech. But from that transition, it was a long one. It took like 3 or 4 months to the 3 most important steps that I think anybody who is trying to pivot into tech should keep in mind. Number 1 is learn just enough to be able to build something and then repeat. So we are all guilty, or at least I was super guilty, of being in this hamster wheel of taking courses, especially in the field of data science and data analytics. It seems like there are always so many new tools being rolled out, especially with AI tools. And it can be such an overwhelming feeling to be like, okay, I have to learn this new skill and this new skill and this new skill. And then you find yourself caught up in what I call a hamster wheel of courses where you're like, yeah, if I just take this next course, then I can add that to my skill section and be like, yeah, I know this, right? And then let me like take this next course and this next course, because taking courses is such a passive way to learn. You're pretty much just like clicking through these courses, right? The next best thing is courses that have a capstone project at the end that force you to apply those skills and build something with it. One of the certifications that I took when I was first transitioning into data analytics was the Google Data Analytics certificate. And that had 7 or 8 modules where you would like get a certificate after each module. But at the end, there was a capstone project that you were forced to do to be able to say, hey, I completed this entire course. And I really liked the structure of that. A lot of courses today now do that structure because everybody knows the value of project-based learning. But a step above that is actually taking learning into your own hands, right? Don't just be building a portfolio or putting a project in your portfolio when you feel like you have mastered everything, right? You want to, like I said, learn as little as possible to be able to apply those skills. And then once that mini project is built, then you go back to learning some more. And that way you have this rhythm where you are not just passively soaking in knowledge, you're then applying it to building something. And eventually those building blocks add up to maybe building a bigger project that you can showcase in your portfolio. And then repeating that whole process again until you feel comfortable with the skills that you've actually applied on your resume rather than just saying, hey, I learned these skills. Okay, my number 2 tip is to leave jobs early, because when you leave on time, when you feel like it's time to leave a job, that's already too late. So this role where I said that I learned everything that I know today about data analytics and data science, I actually left that role within 9 months. I did not want to leave at that time because I loved that team and I loved how much they invested in us and believed in us and the experiences that I gained from it. But another opportunity came knocking, and I remember at the time it was for a startup, and I was so scared joining a startup, but I knew I needed a change of pace from the consulting world, and that job offer was for a data science position. I was scared shitless to take that job because I was thinking about, what would people say if I left after 9 months? Like, what would my teammates say after investing so much time in me? They're going to hate me. I remember crying so much when I told my team members that I was leaving because it did just feel like I had just joined the team. But there was an itch that I needed to satisfy because I knew I needed to gain different experiences outside of the consulting world, like I said. And also, it was a pretty hefty salary bump. So I was like, okay, why listen to what I think are supposed to be like the normal deadlines of like people saying, oh, you should stay at a job for at least 2 years, right? I did that in my finance role. And by the time I left that job, I hated it, which goes to show that usually when people think it's time to go, it's when they hate their job. You want to leave before it reaches that point, because that is how you keep your memories from a place happy. And that is how you avoid the resentment that comes from staying at a place where you've already outgrown. That first leap that I took after 9 months kind of guided my way through my future job transitions, where some people would call it job hopping, right? But I consider it just an aversion to complacency. After having stayed in the finance role for 2 years, I vowed to never stay that long at a job anymore, because I knew myself and I know that I get bored very easily if I am stuck in one place for too long. I find myself myself having like wandering eyes and being like, what else is out there, right? And so now I always encourage people to interview at least every 6 to 12 months, establish a regular cadence, because you know yourself and you know when you are likely to feel those symptoms of burnout and you want to be able to cut that short. That aversion to complacency and that willingness to take risks is also what allowed me to increase my salary in tech so quickly. I almost quadrupled my salary in tech over the past 5 years that I've been a working adult. And I credit that completely to listening to that gut feeling of like, I know I'm about to feel burnt out. Let's get in front of that. Okay, and tip number 3 is to make your own luck. Put yourself in the position to receive opportunities. So what I mean by that is when I broke into data analytics, I knew nobody. I had no connections. Like I said, I didn't even have a tech advanced degree, which before I broke into data science specifically, I thought that everybody needed to have a master's in something like statistics, data science, computer science. And I let that hold me back for a long time. You know, I even went as far as taking prerequisite courses to be able to apply to master's programs in data science. Spoiler alert, I never ended up applying to those roles because my data science offer came to me before I needed to apply to any higher level degrees. But that came because I made my own luck, and I made my own luck when I first broke into data analytics as well. That is, I didn't have the connections or a degree, but the former of the connections, I could at least change that, right? The degree part, I couldn't go back in time and change the degree that I got, and that like ended up being a sort of regret for me. But what I found was the networking route was something I was in control of. Having connections in the field was something I did have control over. So I networked my butt off to land that data analytics role. What people don't know about that 3 to 4 month period where I was applying to hundreds and hundreds of jobs was that I was also having hundreds and hundreds of conversations. Learning how to network via whether that's like virtual coffee chats or going to industry events, that is not something that many people talk about, but it is something you learn over time the more conversations you have. I remember how scary it was to message a stranger and be like, hey, can I like grab 15 minutes of your time? But what I learned after so many conversations is that people love talking about themselves. And so the angle that I went at when I was trying to learn from other data analysts and hiring managers was that I came in from an angle of flattery. And I was like, hey, I want to learn how you got to where you are right now and whether you like your experience at the company so that maybe one day I could be in your shoes, right? That's like usually the angle that I went with coffee chats. And coffee chats has been my number one secret weapon in terms of making my own luck and like creating my foundation of people who will vouch for me inside of a field. And then on top of those coffee chats, right, because you can only have so many coffee chats, like you are limited by your time, I then built a personal brand on top of it. I talk a lot on all my channels about the importance of building your personal brand. Backstory is I built my personal brand on LinkedIn by sharing personal stories and lessons that I've learned first breaking into tech and into data analytics and data science. And those stories happen to find their way to hundreds of thousands of people. And so soon enough, people started knowing me as like a thought leader in the field, even though like I had no experience, right? But being open, sharing your stories and like weaving that into your personal brand as somebody who is like authentic and willing to share your learnings, to a lot of people, you are a thought leader because they don't have the guts to do that. And that's kind of the backstory of how I was able to go from having conversations and building connections within the field, like actively going out and doing that, to then having people coming to me for those chats and knowing me as somebody worth knowing in data science. That intersection of knowing the right people in the industry and the right people knowing me in this industry is how opportunities came my way, right? Like I was not solely relying on me chasing after those opportunities. I also built a brand that allowed me to be discoverable and allowed those opportunities to come find me. And that is completely how I credit being able to have started my own company at 5 or 6 years into my career. So moral of the story of all three of these lessons of 1, learn just enough to start building, 2, leave early because leaving on time is late, and 3, making your own opportunities is like to just go the extra mile, right? I mentioned how when I was 2 years into my first finance role, right, I was so jaded and I was like, I don't want to do the hard things of like learning new skills and applying to jobs and meeting new people, right? I slowly realized that all three of those things you have to do. You have to get out of your comfort zone to be able to change yourself, right? But what I got wrong back when I was like, oh, I don't want to do these hard things, is believing that all of these hard things have to be done at once. All three of these tips that I just outlined, I learned slowly, day by day, conversation by conversation, job application after job application, one at a time. I realized that I could dismantle those preconceived notions of like what is considered difficult and slowly get out of my comfort zone to eventually like change myself 360. If I were to look back to who I was 5 years ago when I was in that finance role, I would say like, yes, she is still the lazy piece of shit that she is today, but at least today I have the resources at my disposal to be able to make the change because I know that I can tackle those big, intimidating things by breaking it down piece by piece, day by day. If you don't come away from this video with any other tip, it should be that last one, that you have it within yourself to break into tech or do any hard thing. If you just take a big, scary, daunting task and break it down in manageable chunks, and next thing you know, you're gonna look back and you're gonna be like, wait, there was actually a lot of progress there. I just didn't realize it because I was so busy raising the bar for myself. So if I could do it, I know you can too.